Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto this week, the U.S. Congress continues to ignore the cannabis issue. They are more focused on a federal ban on hemp, a product they created and defined in the Farm Bill of 2018. Now, that hemp industry is exploding and the licensed and regulated cannabis industry is imploding. Can both sides come up with a united front for products from the same plant?
You're coming up with the term, this is a cannabinoid plant. This is not marijuana versus hemp. Accurate?
Yeah, I mean, in a way you can think of hemp as a strain of cannabis. It's the same genus.
Pressure builds in Texas for their governor, Greg Abbott, to veto the hemp ban bill in his state, while his lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, a.k.a. Beetlejuice, becomes public enemy number one.
We're talking probably close to $1 million, if not more, in lobbying money spent with lobbyists with direct ties and people with direct ties to the lieutenant governor.
And a poll of sports fans concludes that sponsorships by cannabinoid products is okay with them in all of the professional leagues. And a special exclusive interview with one of the most respected and influential women in the cannabis world, Jamie Pearson, just back from moderating a panel at the Benzinga Conference in Chicago.
What are the lessons learned from Germany that perhaps the U.S. could mimic or learn from?
I know this is going to be controversial, but I personally think what Germany got right was they allow home grow.
All that and state-by-state cannabis reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Elena Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly roundup of the fight to end cannabis prohibition. I'm Elena Pinto. It's that time again to remind you to download the PCM Space TV app available at Google Play and the App Store free of charge. The app is where you will find this program posted first thing on Monday mornings, plus documentation of the last 4 years in cannabis news. You can scan the QR code on the screen. It will take you where you need to go to download it. Just make sure you search for it with the space between PCM and TV. First up, the battle to ban THC-infused products is heating up from Congress in Washington, D.C. to Texas and in California. And now, this week, the focus will be on Ohio. That is where Kerry Hinkle explains more in his weekly hemp report.
Hi, everyone. This is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp, and this is my hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, we head to the Buckeye State, where for years now there has been an ongoing debate on how to regulate where and what types of hemp products can be sold. Governor DeWine of Ohio has for years publicly lambasted products like Delta 8. Reports on the ground have been that he had passed billboards on the side of the road and was like, what the hell are these products doing being sold here? These products should only be sold in dispensaries. And so similar bills have been making their way through the legislature that have continually failed in the past years, but this year, Senate Bill 56 has momentum. This bill would restrict products that have more than 2 milligrams of THC per package and 0.5 milligram of THC per serving to regulated marijuana dispensaries. Now, there is an interesting carve-out in the bill that would allow for 5 milligram beverages to continue to be sold in outlets like grocery stores, gas stations, and liquor stores. So this would realistically put beverages in similar fashions to be sold as alcohol while taking all other form factors like edibles, THCA flower, and tinctures, and being those products would be then required to be sold in the regulated marijuana dispensary market. Opponents of the bill say the milligram limits go too far, and even traditional products like a full spectrum CBD tincture will have more THC than 2 milligrams in the entire package. So now, again, similar efforts had died in past years, but there has been change in Senate and House leadership in recent months that indicate that this bill has more teeth to it now more than ever. Now, all eyes in the Buckeye State around hemp will head to the legislature on Wednesday at 11 a.m., where there is a committee vote in the Judiciary Committee. If this bill moves out of the Judiciary Committee, we expect it to pass the full House and Senate and head to the governor's desk. So we have reports on the ground of folks working, the members of that committee, to try and either amend or kill that bill in the committee this Wednesday. So we will know more on the future of hemp in the Buckeye State probably by Wednesday afternoon. So we will keep an eye out, and I will be sure to report back again next week. I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp, and this was my report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We'll see you next week.
One guy we know who will be right in the middle of that is Cannabis Coast to Coast News contributor Tim Johnson. He is a former law enforcement veteran whose company is Cannabis Safety First. And this week, Tim was honored by Medical Dispensary Mavuno of Ohio with their Activist of the Year award. WPCM TV co-founder Jimmy Young talked with Tim last week, and he explains why nothing is easy in the State House of Ohio, or for that matter, in any state.
Isn't there a way to make it work for everybody? Isn't the pie big enough, Tim?
It certainly is, Jimmy. And it comes down to, I'll say, political ignorance. In the Ohio Revised Code, for our medical program, it's 3796 chapter. And for the adult choice program, it's 3780 chapter. We have another chapter for hemp. We use the word hemp. We use cannabis. We use marijuana. I've talked with several legislators. I've introduced, bills to say, we can put all of this in one chapter, and it can be 3796 chapter A, and then chapter B, and then chapter C, however you want to do it. That can be done. Is it difficult? No, it's not difficult. You just got to put our legislative service attorneys, put them together and get it done. That can be done very, easily, and we can get down instead of, people, you go to the courts or stuff now, or even in legislation, somebody says marijuana, somebody says cannabis, you got a legislator raising their hand. What's the difference between the two? What's going on? They don't know. So we got to get down to just, we got cannabis and we got hemp. Then we got these three chapters under one chapter, right. Sub-chapters under one chapter, and it's good. For me, and the lawyers and the judges that I've talked to, they said, that's a great idea, Tim. But then when you take it I go down to the State House and I bring it to the legislators. We can't do that. That's too much work. I'm like,
yeah, there you go. Too much work. And that's
what you guys are here for, is work. So let's get it done. I'll help you with it.
Can we make laziness a misdemeanor, please?
No, let's make it a felony.
All right.
That's what they're trying to do to us. So let's make it a felony.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The drama here in Ohio continues as House and Senate bills push their agenda for hemp regulations and potential bans, as well as ongoing restrictions for adult use cannabis. One legal scholar is actually arguing that the Ohio Constitution may actually have some limitations on what lawmakers can do to change our voter-approved policies. Additionally, Ohio State University held a public talk where they talked about the General Assembly and their unchecked power, and again, legally, what are they allowed to do to change voter-approved cannabis reform. There's also been a continuing media outcry about how these changes are going to hurt businesses, festivals, and people. We need to continue to speak up, stand up, Ohio, and I am Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Over the past few weeks, we've continued to report on the conflict between Delta-8 hemp products and licensed adult use products also derived from the cannabis sativa plant. This all started with the Farm Bill of 2018, when Congress created a definition of hemp products that are limited to under 0.3% THC in dry weight. That opened a legal Pandora's box that created a loophole, opening the door to another billion-dollar industry. And now lawmakers in Washington, D.C. are admitting they had no clue what they were doing when they passed the bill 7 years ago. Now, the United States Congress is trying to figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle and regulate these products. Of course, the first reaction by many states is to just ban the Delta-8 or hemp-derived THC products, but now there are jobs and billions of dollars at stake. A bill banning THC hemp products outright is now on the desk of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Many groups in Texas are protesting the bill that threatens 8,000 businesses in the Lone Star State. This week, a group of 100,000 Republican primary voters signed a petition asking Governor Abbott to veto that bill. So this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue at all. Homegrown Heroes is a CBD company in Texas where Cynthia Cabrera is the chief strategy officer. She was one of the guests on the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast that will be released this week. Needless to say, this is a pretty stressful chapter in the fight to end cannabis prohibition in the state of Texas.
You're coming up with the term. This is a cannabinoid plant. This is not marijuana versus hemp. Accurate?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you can think of hemp as a strain of cannabis. It's the same genus, and there's a maybe arbitrary limit that's put in place by federal law. But I think we have a real opportunity here to move to regulate cannabinoids that are federally legal already. Hemp-derived cannabinoids. We should be moving to regulate those at the federal level, and then use that hopefully as the model to regulate all cannabinoids equally, or not equally, but based upon their risk to the user, their intended use, and appropriately, and without being agnostic to what kind of cannabis plant they were derived, these products were derived from.
And John, you're uniquely positioned with both vertically integrated entities on both sides here. And of course, having the role of being the head of the hemp committee for the NCIA helps as well. You and I talked about how can we as those who are pro cannabis plant, find a way to explain and educate to those who are making our laws and regulations how best to handle this all of a sudden huge controversy between the marijuana side and the hemp side.
Yeah, that's definitely right. I think we should consider this almost like an opportunity where I think there's a general consensus to some extent that cannabis is overregulated across the country. Regulations vary state by state. But I think there's a sense of overregulation because no one knew what to expect. So everyone went a little aggressive and probably overboard. And then with Farm Bill being passed, and people are calling it loopholes. I think they're just following the law. But regardless, it's opened itself to a whole world of wonderful cannabinoids and a lot of innovation, right?
Is there a way for Texas to show the way to get it done? But does it start with the governor's veto of that law that's on his desk right now?
Well, that would be the easiest way to start, is with a veto. Otherwise, we end up back in court. And for those who don't know, Hometown Hero, the company that I work for, filed for an injunction in 2021. And that injunction has kept the entire state of Texas in business. So for the past 4 years, almost 5 years, everyone has been operating off of the same injunction. And to pat Hometown Hero on the back, I wasn't with the company at the time, but to pat Hometown Hero on the back, and because I share the same values that they do, the injunction was not specifically just for Hometown Hero. It was broad, it was all encompassing, and it allowed everyone, including companies from California, Colorado, New York, to be able to sell their products in Texas. Getting a veto from the governor would be a great starting point. The idea, and John, you mentioned something earlier, and it kind of made me laugh a little bit because you said unregulated hemp markets. And it just makes me laugh because I have to pay somebody to stay on top of all the compliance for hemp in all the different states because it's regulated. And they're all different. None of them are the same. And it's just a massive time and money suck. But, the fight in Texas was very interesting in that the lieutenant governor, Beetlejuice, and the senator who came up with it basically said, we will not expand the medical marijuana program unless we get this ban. And all the medical marijuana operators, all three of them, one of whom has 70% of the market, that's Texas Originals, they all advocated.
Just to give you more of a feel for the passion for this cause in Texas, here's one of Homegrown Heroes videos talking about how money is behind the fight to end the hemp market in that state and where that cash is heading.
A Texas medical marijuana company bribed politicians to get rid of hemp? We're talking probably close to $1 million, if not more, in lobbying money spent with lobbyists with direct ties and people with direct ties to the lieutenant governor. Behind the scenes, we've been constantly fighting with them on the legislative sessions because they've actively been trying to get rid of the hemp industry since 2021. Around that time, hemp-derived THC became very prevalent and started to explode in growth within the state of Texas. Texas Original's revenue dropped by about 50% the subsequent year, 2022. I was told recently by an insider within the Teacup program companies that if the hemp industry was not removed from Texas, the Teacup program was going to fail, and subsequently the 3 license holders within that program were going to go bankrupt. That gives you some pretty clear understanding as to the financial motives as to what is going on here.
The alcohol industry is certainly well aware that embracing the cannabis reform effort can only help the downward trend of the public now using cannabis daily more than drinking daily. The Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association is now coming out against the House Subcommittee's recommendation to ban all THC-infused products. The president and CEO of that organization, Francis Creighton, kept their message simple. Quote, "Prohibition of all cannabinoids is not the answer." Unquote. They do say that banning synthetic cannabinoid products does make sense for public safety. The issue of under-regulated hemp products is not just an issue in states without adult use legalization like Texas, but it also is impacting legal adult use states like California, Michigan, and even here in Massachusetts. Curtis Emery has been researching just how out of control the lack of regulations are, especially when you can now order THCA products online from a variety of sites and have them delivered to your door. Here's Curtis's Bay State Cannabis Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. On June 12th, hemp-derived THC online retailer Area 52 announced that it's expanding its features to include legal and secure nationwide shipping. This is interesting. The site takes advantage of the 2018 Farm Bill, which allows hemp as legal tender as long as it contains less than 0.03% THC. According to Area 52, their wide array of Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, and other cannabinoid products do not contain more than 0.03% THC, making them legal products to be sold all over the U.S., depending on state regulations. In Massachusetts, this offers an interesting conflict. There's legal cannabis dispensaries all over the state, which are beholden to a variety of rules, which include parameters on how to operate within the Commonwealth, within their communities, and within the regulations of the licenses from which they bought from the state. Sites like Area 52, Mood.com, and Rose Delight are able to move a variety of hemp-derived THC products with little or no oversight from the FDA regarding age gating and a variety of other rules which legal dispensaries are required to both consider and adhere to. In Massachusetts, the current omnibus bill in front of the state Senate is taking aim at hemp-derived THC products, including CBD and hemp-derived THC drinks. Large steps have been made to remove hemp-derived THC drinks from liquor stores and hemp-derived THC products from convenience stores all over the state. However, with this guidance, there have been an obvious gap in policing these rules, making it very difficult to follow through on this stance, giving an opportunity to sites like Area 52, which are not selling in any brick and mortar location, the ability to continue working within the state without adhering to the current guideline. As the states continue to consider hemp-derived THC products, it should be interesting to see how that affects retailers like Area 52. Also, in the coming months, it should be interesting to see if there is any effect between online hemp-derived THC web stores and the competition with brick and mortar legalized cannabis dispensaries across the state. Until then, I'm Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
So, if you aren't confused about how and why these products are in under-regulated markets and regulated markets, check out Brandon Jones's report from a cannabis festival in Missouri, sponsored by a beer company.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Be Green Distribution with the Cannabis Coast to Coast Report here from Missouri, and I'm live from Boulevardia. That's a festival here downtown put on by one of the local breweries, Boulevard. And they have tents all over. I'm actually coming to you from the Canna Village. Yes, that's right. A Canna Village in downtown Kansas City at an alcohol event. Tech 9 is getting ready to take the stage, and a little bit, lots of music going around. And yes, technically, there is no consumption allowed, but there is consumption being taken place all over this event. But I want to get to a big topic that's going on here in Missouri, and that is THCA. Yes, it's happening all over the country. Some shops have been shut down, and some have been sent a cease and desist. 16 different locations here in the state of Missouri have been sent a cease and desist to stop selling THCA flower. Now, they do have, in some cases, up to 60% of their inventory is THCA, and we're still up in the gray area as to whether they actually have any certificates of analysis or any COAs for those products or not. So that might be the gray area where some are being allowed to do this and sell it because they do have that COA to show that the product has been tested and proven to be THCA and therefore allowed to be sold in smoke shops where others might not. We're still kind of waiting to see what the actual cease and desist are written exactly. My buddy Ethan Thampy is going to be speaking out for those specific people, and he has been our show recently. So we'll see what's going to go on here with THCA. I know it is being sold all over the state at different smoke shops, gas stations, and all over. So as of now, you can buy THCA anywhere you'd like in the state of Missouri. I'm Brandon Jones with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Be Green Distribution. Have a great week. Stay educated and medicated.
That'll do it for the A block, or first section of this week's news show. And now we will get into the international scene in Canada and across the pond to Europe. That's where we will introduce you to a new reporter from England who expands our cannabis coverage in Europe. And that still includes the editor of the Business of Cannabis, Ben Stevens. And then we have an exclusive interview with Jamie Pearson from the New Holland Group, who is one of the most influential and respected consultants in the industry, who is very familiar with what is going on in the expanding international market. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B block, or second section of our news show this week. I'm Elena Pinto. This is the time we check in on the international scene. First stop in Europe, where Ben Stevens explains that even though Germany has made medical cannabis legal to be prescribed by registered medical professionals, there is now an issue with people exploiting that online access. That could lead to more changes in the new laws in that country and much more. Here's Ben Stevens.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's report from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A landmark court case in Cologne could reshape the way medical cannabis is prescribed and sold in Germany. The North Rhine Chamber of Pharmacists has just won a major victory against an online platform called CuraMedix, which was offering remote cannabis prescriptions through its website. The Chamber argued that CuraMedix was effectively bypassing key safeguards, with patients filling in an online questionnaire and then selecting cannabis strains before they'd even received a proper prescription. The court agreed, ruling that this kind of remote prescribing falls short of medical standards and that promoting cannabis in this way breaches Germany's strict advertising rules for prescription medicines. It's the latest flashpoint in a fast-changing cannabis market. Since Germany partially legalized cannabis last year, sales of medical cannabis have tripled, with 100 tons consumed between April 2024, when CanG came through, and 2025. Since Germany partially legalized cannabis last year, it's become a lot easier for patients to gain access to medical cannabis, drawing increasing concerns from politicians and regulators fearful of an emergence of a pseudo-recreational market. As reported recently, Health Minister Nina Walken is now warning of what she calls a disturbing increase in medical cannabis use, directly citing concerns that some recreational users are taking advantage of the system by buying cannabis through these online platforms. Now, more legal challenges are already underway as regulators try to clamp down on similar business models. With political pressure mounting, it looks likely that Germany will soon introduce tighter restrictions on online cannabis prescribing. Critics warn that this could have unintended consequences, pushing patients back to the black market. That's all for me for this week. I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
When it comes to the international markets, and especially in Germany, one of the most sought-after consultants in the world is Jamie Pearson from the New Holland Group. The former founder and CEO of Bang Edibles was one of the featured speakers at the Benzinga Capital Conference this past week in Chicago. She and WPCM TV co-founder Jimmy Young have been friends for years, and here's a little background on the evolving cannabis market in Germany.
Thanks, Elena. We're so lucky and happy to have an old friend of mine to talk about what's going on in Europe and specifically in Germany. We just heard from Ben Stevens, our European reporter, and now we get to hear from Jamie Pearson, who as a consultant is one of the most informed people on what is going on in Europe and specifically in Germany. And you just came back from the Benzinga conference, Jamie, where you actually moderated a panel on this. So tell us a little bit about what's going on in Germany right now as far as the rollout of their cannabis market.
Thanks, Jimmy, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And, the consultancy firm that I started, the New Holland Group, we really do specialize in helping companies that would like to cross the pond from America to Europe and vice versa. So it is an area that I spend a lot of time in on a daily basis, and I watch it pretty closely. And you know this, but the people watching your podcast may not know this, that my kids are German. I've lived in Germany. I speak German, and I've been going back and forth to Germany for the last 25 years. And then I took Bang when I was the CEO of Bang into 9 European countries. So it is definitely a market that I've been involved with a lot. I've spoken at several ICBC events in Berlin and Barcelona. And so just tell you all of that to let you know that I think it's an exciting market. I have a lot of experience in it, and the movement that's happening is fun to watch. So to answer your question specifically, it all really started last year on April 1st. Germany legalized adult use cannabis, and they did it with a 3-phase law. And the first phase did the decriminalization and the social clubs. And when people hear social club, they think of the Barcelona consumption lounges or like WeHo. They're actually not social in nature. They're grow cooperatives. And they can have a maximum of 500 members, and there's limits on everything that they can do. But it was a step in the right direction. It was a way for people over the age of 18 to get access to cannabis and become part of these social clubs. And in conjunction with the decriminalization, it really meant that law enforcement could start focusing on other things, because cannabis was going to become ubiquitous because everyone could have it. They could give it, freely back to each other. And it became less of a priority for the police and for law enforcement. So that was phase 1. Phase 2 was more of the commercial element of it. And that's where, and it's the medical side of things where it was being commercially sold. And people need to understand in Germany, they did their commercialization of the medical cannabis in a way that was not like we did it here in the US. They integrated it completely into their healthcare system. So you can go to a doctor, you can get a prescription, you go to the pharmacy, and in some cases, about 20% of the cases, you actually can get the.
The rest of that interview will be released this week on Thursday on the WPCM Space TV network of distribution platforms. So download the app to check that out. Before we leave Europe, we want to introduce you to our new reporter from England. His name is Dave Barton, and we think you'll enjoy his reports as England is starting to change its own national laws when it comes to medical cannabis. Here's Dave.
Oh, hi there, I'm new. I'm Dave Barton, Content and Creative Director at Thermidor.wtf, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast with your UK Canna News. With just over a week left until London's Cannabis Europa conference, Cannabis Reform is back in the mainstream media spotlight. This is primarily the result of the London Drugs Commission's recent deep dive report into cannabis regulation, which recommended decriminalising the possession of small amounts, a move backed by London Mayor Sir Sadiq Khan, who, according to reports, has stated that current rules cannot be justified. For advocates, while it's hoped that increasing medical cannabis patient numbers will soon put cannabis reform back on the political agenda, no major party, let alone the current government, has indicated otherwise. However, Cannabis Europa's organisers have formally invited Sadiq Khan to the conference, but with no news of his participation, it remains to be seen if he'll attend. But if he does, it'll be a major coup for the cause and for the conference. Alongside these developments, the UK government has commissioned the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs to carry out a formal review of medical cannabis-based products. The Minister of State for Policing, Fire and Crime Prevention, Dame Diana Johnson, recently set out a list of priorities for the ACMD, including a review of current evidence and the publication of new recommendations for CBPMs. A new report shows that medical cannabis is being used illegally on the Channel Island of Guernsey, leaving health professionals concerned. 2,300 people were interviewed as part of the Combined Substance Use Strategy 2024 annual report, finding that 79% of those who used cannabis in the last 12 months did not have it prescribed to them, with 70% of those non-prescribed users admitting to using medicinal-grade cannabis. And on that note, I'm Dave Barton signing off. Check out my podcast, The Lobster Pot, on YouTube and Spotify for insights into how our favorite plant is faring all across the world.
Next up, our neighbors to the north in Canada who continue to sort out their own challenges in their federal legal market that generated over $9.1 billion in revenue in the first quarter of 2025. This week, another company with roots in Canada and here in the United States has filed for bankruptcy and receivership. It's Forefront Ventures, based in Phoenix, Arizona. Forefront had outlets in a few states in the United States and in Canada. Many companies are on fumes with a ton of debt coming due over the next 12 months, so this is only the beginning of the end for many. The green rush started 5 years ago, but then turned into a green wall over the past 2 years. Market realities of overregulation, overtaxation, and limited margins has spelled disaster for many, and it is why this industry continues to struggle. Here's more on the Canadian cannabis scene with Debbie Facey.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is the Q1 came out for 2025, which has demonstrated $9.104 billion that has been contributed from the cannabis sector to our overall GDP, which is gross domestic product. Sorry, I had to look it up just to make sure. Next, what we have is Manitoba banning all convenience stores from selling cannabis. This is something that's not only going to help youth from not utilizing cannabis, but also with the whole aspect of not marketing to anyone that is under the age of 18, 19, or 21 plus. This is something that's going to benefit, obviously, Canada and Manitoba as itself. Next, what we have is Fika, which is a cannabis store here in Ontario. It is partnering up with pharmacist-led cannabis consultants. This means that the consultants will be able to provide customers with better understanding when it comes to their products that they're choosing, some of the ailments that they're trying to achieve, and also when it comes to some of the information that bud tenders and store managers aren't able to provide due to the fact of lack of information or lack of credentials. This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
Back here in the United States, Minnesota continues to move slowly towards issuing of their first licenses. They are still writing the regulations and facing legal challenges regarding those new laws in the first place. If this sounds familiar, it also describes what's been going on in Alabama over the first 4 years of their medical program, which has yet to launch. And now facing the ban on hemp products, our own Jennifer Boozer is trying to figure out just how to stay in business. Here's her Alabama report this week.
I'm Jennifer Boozer reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. 5 parents of children potentially eligible for medical cannabis under the long-delayed Alabama program filed a lawsuit and are asking the court to require the AMCC to establish a patient registry. It has been delayed along with the Alabama medical cannabis program since it was passed in 2021. The parents claim specific injuries as a result of the commissioner's failure to establish a patient and caregiver registry, and they seek to demand their children's right to the plant. The commission argued that the lawsuit lacks any standing and asked the AMCC to take steps previously taken or beyond its control. A hearing is scheduled on June 26th. In hemp news, the Alabama Wellness Collective has been spearheading efforts to raise litigation funds to fight the passage of HB 445 under the direction of Jenny Otwell and the AWC board. Growers, processors, retailers, and brands have come together from all over Alabama and other states to work together toward a better future and a more balanced future for hemp in Alabama, and to fight for the rights of small businesses like mine and customers like the ones who shop at Cannabama. A hemp rally will be held in Birmingham on June 20th at Elysian Garden from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. and is free to the public as long as you're 21 and up. For every $25 donation, we will be giving out raffle tickets with a chance to win one of 3 $500 to $1,000 product prize packs before the law goes into effect on July 1st. For more information, visit the AlabamaWellnessCollective.org and join us on Monday nights on Sweet Home Cannabama on FM Talk 106.5 on the Gulf Coast or the Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page. I'm Jennifer Boozer, reporting from Alabama with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
What's in a word? Well, there might not be a word that is more misunderstood than the word marijuana. Originally, when the cannabis sativa plant was used for medicine at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, doctors wrote over 5 million prescriptions for the plant medicine between 1900 and 1906. Back then, the word was spelled with an H instead of a J. Some states, like Massachusetts, have recognized the racist roots of the word, and in medical journals for the state, they have replaced the word marijuana with cannabis. Other states are more enlightened to the history of the word, but in Michigan, all the laws still use the spelling with the letter H in it. Originally, the slang word that is usually translated as, quote, evil weed. Remember, this is a plant called Cannabis sativa, and that is how we try to refer to it. But with the Farm Bill of 2018 and the launching of the billion-dollar hemp market, the word marijuana is being used again to distinguish it from its hemp cousin. No matter what you call it, it sure has created a big mess of laws, taxes, and regulations. Here's Amy Carter with this week's Michigan Cannabis Report.
Amy Carter here with Michigan Weedsters, ready to light up your week with the latest in cannabis news for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Let's dive into the dank happenings around our great state. No tips for you. Timber Cannabis is shelling out a whopping $205,000 to settle a lawsuit after workers claimed the management snatched tips meant for our favorite bud tenders. One employee said he was raking in up to $150 a shift before the tip jar heist began. Fair warning, Timber isn't admitting to any wrongdoing, but more than 60 employees will be getting paid. Still winning, while Ohio's recreational weed market is struggling with prices stuck at $210 an ounce, Michigan is cruising at an average of $62. And guess what? Consumers say our weed is not just cheaper, but better too. Talk about a high five for the mitten. I reported on this last week, but in case you haven't heard, a former Michigan sheriff is pushing for roadside saliva tests to catch high drivers. But critics are calling it junk science, arguing these tests only show the presence of THC, which can linger long after you've sobered up. One advocate even called it a tool of oppression. This proposal is still stuck in committee. Let's hope it stays there. The Marquette-based dispensary Dunegrass Cannabis closed its doors last month without a word. The lights are off, the website is erased, and calls are going unanswered. Let us know if you have any details. Bigfoot Buzz, in an unusual twist, a local dispensary, Unique Cannabis, is offering free joints for anyone with photographic evidence of a recent Bigfoot sighting. A father and son claimed to see a bear-like creature while fishing, but no photo was taken. If you happen to spot Bigfoot, snap that pic and swing by Unique Cannabis for a complimentary pre-roll. That's the highlights for this week. I'm out here live at Gems and Genetics Annual Music Festival. Stay lifted, Michigan. This is Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Virginia, the current governor, Glenn Youngkin's days are numbered, but still has 6 months to rule. He has not been a fan of cannabis at all and twice vetoed adult use legalization bills that made it out of the state's legislature only to be shot down by his vetoes. And now the race for his replacement continues. This week, there will be a primary for the very crowded field for lieutenant governor. Joe Parsons has a preview of the candidates and which ones might be more friendly to cannabis from the others. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I have some positive news from the Commonwealth this week. First up, the race for lieutenant governor is heating up for the Democrats. The primary will be held this week, and all the candidates for the position are more than qualified, and one is a pro-cannabis champion. There are 6 candidates in total, but 3 are leading the way in the polls, and the ones to watch are former Richmond Mayor LeVar Stoney, current sitting Senator Izala Hashimi, and current sitting Senator Aaron Rouse. Former Green Bay Packer turned city council turned state senator Aaron Rouse represents District 22 here in Virginia and has been as much of a champion for cannabis reform as he was for the NFL. He's always fought to keep cannabis behind an age-verified counter and fighting against the legacy market that still reigns supreme in Virginia. Senator Rouse and Representative Paul Krizik co-wrote both the 2024 and 2025 adult use bills that twice passed the House and Senate and were twice stricken down by Governor Glenn Youngkin. While all the current candidates would work well with Abigail Spanberger, Aaron Rouse would not only ensure that we have a safe and fair adult use system, but would also fight for parental rights and justice. A Spanberger-Rouse ticket would definitely help ending cannabis prohibition in Virginia. The month of June is Hemp Month in the Commonwealth, and all month long I will have a focus on hemp on Coffee Talk. This week, my guest was Jason Amatucci from the Virginia Hemp Coalition. An expert in the hemp industry, we discussed the federal proposal to ban hemp-derived products and how the Virginia hemp industry is working to stay alive during these turbulent times. Tune in every Monday at 4:20 p.m. to check it out. And finally, you can check out some of the awesome events for the rest of Hemp Month in Virginia by going to redfirmhemp.com, and you'll get all the information you need. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville. And as always, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
Another southern state that is eyeing cannabis reform is Mississippi. In her Tribal Nations report this week, Tina Tasaka has an update on how that state is progressing on reform and how they are going to allow Native Americans an opportunity to get into the market. Here's Tina with that story and more from Nevada too.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. There is more progress for Mississippi and legal adult use marijuana, specifically for one tribal nation, the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. On June 10th, they held a referendum asking members if they support the tribe developing legislation to decriminalize and regulate possession, production, and distribution of marijuana on tribal lands. The measure passed with about 55% in favor. Chief Cyrus Ben emphasized that this vote doesn't immediately legalize cannabis, rather it empowers the tribal council to commission feasibility studies and draft regulatory frameworks. In the next steps, consultants will assess market potential and public health implications. Medical marijuana became legal in February 2022. We will continue to follow Mississippi and this tribe and report back on the status and updated movement. In Nevada, multi-state cannabis operator Body and Mind has finalized the sale of its cultivation and production operations in Nevada. The transaction follows a January announcement in which the company revealed its intention to sell its subsidiary, Nevada Medical Group, for $2 million. This Nevada sale is the latest in a series of strategic divestitures. In 2023, Body and Mind exited the Michigan market entirely by selling its dispensary there. Earlier in 2024, the company disclosed a deal to sell its Long Beach, California dispensary for $856,250 in cash. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B block of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but we have another half dozen reports from states around the country. Plus, Louis Joe has the new district report from Washington, D.C., where there might be a legal challenge brewing on the long-standing rules between the federal government and his federal district. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. It's a medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Welcome back to the C section or final section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. Here's our final reminder to scan the QR code on the screen to get you to the App Store or Google Play Store so you can keep up with our expanding coverage of the fight to end cannabis prohibition. And yes, it's a free app. That fight is heating up in our nation's capital and the unique relationship that district has in this country. After all, it's not a state, but a federal district with its own rules, regulations, and a vibrant medical cannabis program. And now one operator is going to court trying to use a legal precedent that might have countrywide implications. Capital Hemp is DC's oldest hemp retailer, and that group filed 2 lawsuits this past week over the confusing laws and restrictions in the district. One is the argument that the district lacks the legal authority to regulate hemp since the code doesn't even mention the product by name. Capital Hemp says they have been unfairly targeted as an illegal cannabis operator despite the Farm Bill of 2018, which opened the door to selling legal hemp. The next lawsuit is over the Harris Rider, which is once again attached to the federal budget bill. Capital Hemp and their attorneys are arguing that DC is still treating hemp as a Schedule I federally illegal substance. In the meantime, medical cannabis stores are open and operating under the guidelines and rules set up separately in the district. Our new DC reporter, Louis Joe, brought attention to this conflict in his report last week. And here's Louis's report for this week.
I'm Louis Joe, founder of Green Guard, Washington, D.C.'s first social equity and only licensed cannabis courier. On today's District Chronicles, we're exploring the intersection of cannabis science, lab testing, and innovation. In an industry that's expanding rapidly, ensuring integrity in research and product safety is more important than ever. My guests today are the minds behind Canna.com and Hyphae Lab, two platforms revolutionizing cannabis testing and plant research. With the upcoming Canna Summit, they're bringing together leaders and experts to shape the next chapter of cannabis advancement. This is the essential conversation for anyone invested in the future of cannabis here in DC.
I've been a nurse for about 15 years, and I've been in holistic health for about 10 years. And I started hosting events here in Florida in 2016 in the cannabis space. We host local community networking events. And I always say you heal in community. So it's really important to get together with your local people.
I want you to tell us about your event that's happening here in DC.
It's called Canna Summit DC. It's happening Labor Day weekend, August 29th and 30th at the Culture House DC, which was one of the first African-American churches, and it's now become an art gallery. And it's an incredible space for this event. Bring the community together. We're calling all industry leaders in cannabis, psychedelics, and holistic health to converge on the nation's capital to incite change.
And the Canna Summit will be a major step forward in uniting experts, entrepreneurs, and advocates. Cannabis is evolving, and only those who embrace science and progress will thrive. This has been District Chronicles on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Louis Joe, founder of Green Guard, Washington, D.C.'s first social equity and only licensed cannabis courier.
With many businesses folding all over the country and the internal battle between cannabis and hemp industries, people are still opening new stores and applying for licenses. Case in point is California, where the numbers of licenses grew for the first time in 3 years. Okay, so it's only a 1% uptick, but it does stop the downward trend where that state lost 30% of its operators in 2023 and 2024. At the end of the first quarter of this year, there are now 8,530 operators who are licensed in the Golden State. And now let's check in on Oklahoma with Kimmy Cannabis.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Canna Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This past week, nearly 200 cannabis professionals gathered for a metric training hosted by the Oklahoma User Exchange. The event offered sessions for all levels, from beginners to advanced users, helping businesses stay compliant and confident in Oklahoma's ever-evolving cannabis landscape. Metric shared a sustainability update saying they've reduced the plastic in their tags by 30%, which they say helps lower their carbon footprint. They also mentioned the attachment sticks are now made from Blue Tote recyclable materials. When asked if those cost savings would be passed on to the licensees, Metric responded, no, but we reduced the carbon footprint. In other news, a new company called High Vibes is making waves in the community by hosting high-energy cannabis events. Their latest, High Spikes, was a sand volleyball tournament with guest DJs, local brands, food, slip and slides, and all the good vibes. Oklahoma continues to bring the peoples together through creative cannabis-centered experiences. And if full venue consumption isn't allowed, look for a Canna Talk About It sesh area or another great team that's creating safe spaces to medicate. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Several news items this week out of Oregon. A federal district court has struck down Oregon's Measure 119, which required state-licensed cannabis businesses to sign a labor peace agreement with unions in order to renew their license. 2 cannabis businesses challenged the law and won. The court determined that the National Labor Relations Act preempted state law and thus invalidated Measure 19. The OLCC has subsequently indicated that they will appeal this order. Next, Oregon Governor Tina Kotek has signed SB 162, which gives law enforcement authority to destroy hoop houses, among other things. And finally, a 19-year-old Medford man was arrested and charged in connection with selling cannabis to children as young as 11. Follow the rules, people. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Even with the doom and gloom of market forecasts and the impact of the hemp market, you have to wonder what impact this might have on the publicly traded cannabis stocks. Well, wonder no more. That's why we look forward to Doug Miller's High on Wall Street report every week. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Village Farms International, trading under the stock ticker VFF, is officially back in NASDAQ's good graces. The cannabis operator has regained compliance with the stock exchange's listing rules by meeting the minimum $1 closing bid price requirement. This comes after Village Farms was granted an extension back in April, following an earlier warning about its low share price. The move keeps VFF trading on the NASDAQ capital market, avoiding a delisting. In a bold pivot, the company also announced it's ditching its fresh produce Vanguard food to go all in on cannabis. That shift frees up Village Farms to double down on the international cannabis markets with assets in Europe and a growing footprint in export sales. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around $1.07 and it appears to be pulling back. So let's watch for that bottom before it wants to bounce back up. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
What's up, everybody? This is Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting from just outside of Chicago, Illinois, for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about some numbers. According to LeafLink, 6 out of the 50 states over the next couple years are going to account for about 75% of the cannabis sales across the whole United States. One of those 6 states is Illinois. The other of those 5 are New York, Maryland, Minnesota, Ohio, and New Jersey, believe it or not. But supposedly 75% of the cannabis sales over the next couple of years are going to be from those main 6 states. Kind of interesting. LeafLink also said that Illinois is outlooked to sell about $2.8 billion worth of cannabis product by 2027. That being said, Illinois already hit $2 billion in 2024, so I don't know. Let's see. I think that, Illinois is going to beat that 2.8 by 2027, especially for the fact that LeafLink also reported that there's going to be over 140 licenses coming online within a year. I would love to see them come online within a year, but I don't think LeafLink knows how Chicago and Illinois works. But there are 140 coming. Whether it's within a year or not is to be determined. But there's more coming online, and we'll see if we hit that 2.8 billion by 2027. I'll bet you we'll hit that 2.8 billion by next year. But that's what I think. Anyways, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm just reporting on the news. So that sums it up for Chicago, Illinois, and surrounding area. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
My name is Xavier Jaillet. I am chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and an attorney at the McDonald Hopkins law firm. And here's what's happening in Colorado cannabis news this week. While most of the industry was in the Windy City for the Benzinga Cannabis Capital Conference, policymakers and regulators found themselves in Denver for two very important policy and regulatory focused conferences that were hosted in the city this week. The first, on Tuesday and Wednesday, was hosted by the Cannabis Regulators Association, or CANRA for short, and it was the external stakeholder annual meeting. This meeting focuses on bringing perspectives from policymakers and regulators, both at the national and international levels, to create educational opportunities for local, state level, and other cannabis regulators around the United States. The conference focuses on developing policy, looking forward, and potentially allowing regulators in different states to learn from mistakes or challenges faced by regulators in other states. In other words, creating a way for the regulators themselves, the lawmakers and the policymakers, to ensure that future regulations are indeed moving the needle forward for the cannabis industry. The second conference that was hosted this week in Denver was the International Cannabis Bar Association's Cannabis Law Institute. Now, INCBA for short and CLI for short, the CLI is a leading conference that attracts lawmakers, attorneys, and other legal-minded individuals on an annual basis to participate in 2 days of both continuing legal education, critical panels, and participating in speeches from some of the leading minds and attorneys in the cannabis space. This year proved to be no different, with remarkable panels and educational opportunities focused both on state-licensed marijuana markets and the evolution thereof, and then also of opportunities and developments on the hemp side, as states continue to grapple with the lack of federal oversight for hemp products and the need to fill that void with state level regulations. So Colorado hosted two very important policy and regulatory conferences this week, perhaps signaling the continued participation of Colorado at the epicenter of progressive marijuana reform. That's it for the Colorado Cannabis News Report this week. My name is Xavier Jaillet, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally this week, a recent poll of sports fans conducted by the Sports Business Journal shows overwhelming support from fans for cannabis-based sponsorships at ballparks, arenas, and stadiums. The poll was limited to sports fans from the 24 adult use legal states and was conducted by the Rhode Island-based Performance Research Institute and the Maryland-based Full Circle Research Group. The conclusion was that more than half of the sports fans over 21 support the acceptance of CBD or THC-infused products showing up inside these venues. More accepted CBD products than THC, but both delivered a majority of support. Interestingly, it was the supporters of Major League Soccer and UFC who were the biggest supporters, with over 70% acceptance, while the NFL and Major League Baseball had the least percentage, but both were over 45%. The other part of the poll that was interesting was that only 17% of those polled were aware of any CBD or THC brands that are currently involved with team sponsorships. The first cannabinoid products to be involved with pro sports was Charlotte's Web, being the official CBD brand of Major League Baseball, while Basketball's Nets and Liberty have a deal with Mind Drinks. A sure sign that normalization is slowly developing, but like everything in cannabis standard time, it's one step forward and two steps backwards. That'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly, and we'll see you next time.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Be Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Debbie Fazy with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today, and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Elena Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCM TV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Elena Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.